Let me give you a little biography. Dr. Shauna Springer, who's going to be our speaker tonight. She is the TAPS Red Team Senior Director, and she will tell you what TAPS stands for. Known to many veterans as Doc Springer. She has helped hundreds of warriors reconnect with their tribe, strengthen their most important relationships, and build lives that are driven by their deepest values. She has particular expertise in attachment processes, trauma recovery, innovative suicide prevention approaches, relationship counseling, peer support program development, and veterans issues, including post-discharge adjustment and strategies for engaging veterans in behavioral health care. Dr. Springer is a licensed psychologist with an undergraduate degree from Harvard University and a doctoral degree from the University of Florida. Let's bring her on.
Yeah.
Hi. So,
Hi, you must not be a Marine.
they used to call me Devil Doc, and I thought I was being insulted at first until I figured out that's actually a compliment. So, now Bob and Dennis promised not to heckle me, right, guys?
No, we didn't promise.
I thought I heard a promise in there.
Here comes the Marine. Here comes the Marine.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. All right, how's that?
Good job. Good job.
The technology is 99% of my anxiety anytime I speak with a group of veterans. The Doc Springer thing, I want to talk to you about that for a minute because about 9 years ago when I started at the VA, I came in as Dr. Springer and fortunately pretty quickly figured out that I needed to slow down and put aside what I thought I knew and just listen. And over a period of some time, I became adopted into this beautiful, fierce tribe. This tribe that loves a good laugh. I guess the best way to get a good round of applause is to say, no report.
Yeah.
There you go.
That doesn't apply to you, though.
Oh, okay. I guess I have to say something meaningful. I want to talk about my process working in the VA in terms of my work with Vietnam veterans, because what I know, I learned because I listened to Vietnam veterans. And it was Vietnam veterans that first called me Doc and that first trusted me and taught me some of the things that I needed to understand so that I could treat the pain that I was seeing. And it wasn't the typical story of post-traumatic stress. There was a lot of other things going on, grief and so many other things that sometimes get overlooked. So we want to talk about this perhaps tonight. I thought about what am I going to call this and decided to call this the dragon's tail. Using the concept of a dragon is helpful because I think about the Vietnam War as a war unlike any other war before that time. And it was a war that scorched the earth, and it was a war that caused the death of 58,000 American service members. And in the 10 years following that, 2 or 3 times as many died by suicide. This is a war that's really left such a wake in our society. It divided our society, and we think about the time that happened, and that's really, to me, the head of the dragon, the fire-breathing part of the dragon. What I think sometimes we miss is that a dragon has a spiked tail, which is also weaponized and can be dangerous. And so when I was working with so many Vietnam veteran patients for the 8 years I was at the VA, there were some long-lasting psychological impacts from the Vietnam War that started to emerge as themes. Now, my current position is at the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. That's a nonprofit based in DC. We work with families of the fallen. That's my more than full-time job. I'm so proud to work there. It's an amazing nonprofit. but I'm not here tonight representing an organization. I'm just here because I was invited by my friend Steve Burchick, who's in your group, and I was honored to walk with all of you in the 4th of July parade, this last 4th of July. Dennis says I can show up again and walk again. It was a great honor. And I'm here because I care, and I wanted to talk from my heart to your heart about what I was seeing when I was at the VA. So here are 3 things that keep me up at night. Now the end of the story is I still have so much hope for everybody in this room, but I do have some concerns, and I want to make sure that these concerns, that we talk about them and that they are addressed directly. The first concern is that the way that Vietnam veterans lost so many beloved brothers and sisters in arms in such high volume was a trauma. And so many of the Vietnam veterans that I met with had such a burden of grief that was totally unaddressed for decades. For 10, 20, 30 years, nobody had helped them work through any of that grief. And it concerns me that as we come into a stage of life where sometimes our health starts to decline, that in a cohort we will see losses in the next 10, 15, 20 years in rather high volume as people start to fade away. I just don't want to lose anyone before their time. And so what's going to happen is as we start to lose our Vietnam veterans, there's going to be more grief piled on top of grief that may not have been addressed. Now, the VA that you came home to was terrible by all accounts. That's the truth. But a lot has changed, and there are some really good people at the VA. I worked there for 8 years. There are some really caring people at that VA where I worked in Northern California. And I would just encourage you to give it a try again if you haven't. Because if you can find a doc, if you can find someone that's trustworthy, that can take you through that grief, it can really be a game changer when you start to have more grief as you lose some of your friends. There is also this phenomenon of as they have health problems that come up, it's different when you're a civilian and you have health problems. The psychology of a civilian with a health problem who's in their 70s, 80s is, well, my body's running down and I made some lifestyle decisions that are catching up to me now. It's different when you served in country. If you were exposed to anything like defoliants or Agent Orange and you're developing certain kinds of health problems, I can tell you that the psychology that I heard from a number of my patients is, Doc, Vietnam got me in the end. When they develop certain kinds of health problems or cancers that may be attributed, that can be a trauma. That you think you've kind of worked away from Vietnam, but the dragon's tail comes back in the end. And it doesn't do us any good to not be aware of that, because if you're not aware of where your mind is and where your heart is, you can get overtaken by it. So I don't want any of us to be overrun by those kind of thoughts and not be able to talk about it. The next thing I want to bring up is the discrepancies in how Vietnam veterans were treated and how today's veterans are treated. This is definitely a real thing. Vietnam veterans were abandoned, rejected. We had society's shame dumped on our Vietnam veterans at the time and still somewhat today. Today's veterans, they receive a hero's welcome, perhaps. There are benefits for them. There are thank you for your service statements made to them widely and commonly. And this can drive a wedge between the tribe of warriors if we let it. It would be totally understandable if people felt some resentment about the differences in how you may have been treated and the differences in how today's veterans are treated. But I want to shift to some interesting similarities between today's veterans and Vietnam veterans, also based on some of my observations. First, despite all of the hero worship, I can tell you I really don't think that today's veterans feel any better understood by society than you have. The difference might be that society has the kind of moral satisfaction to think that we're doing right by veterans now. But all too often, what today's veterans tell me is that they feel that support isn't very deep. It's lip service, it doesn't go very deep. And so sometimes all of the thank you for your service statements, they don't really penetrate to a person's heart. It doesn't mean a lot in a lot of cases. I think you both know that demons will whisper. I think this is something that all warriors know at some level. You both know that when you're vulnerable, that's when demons will come to you and they will say things like, you are a liability, you're a burden to your family, it would be better if you weren't here. These are the things that today's veterans also report to me, that they struggle with these thoughts. And the Vietnam veterans I've met with have struggled with these thoughts sometimes for decades. That you both know that the demons will speak in these wheedling voices, these whispers that will try to convince you of something. And that if you don't turn towards your tribe, the people who can speak truth to those lies, that the voices of the demons will get stronger. When I go out and talk to active duty units, it's the learning that I have from Vietnam veterans that I share with them. It's Vietnam veterans primarily that have taught me how to walk with demons and not be overcome by them. That's what I draw from to help them understand the power of the tribe, the power of the kind of bonds that you have and the camaraderie that you have that can quiet the voices of the demons. And perhaps both of you feel betrayed. This is not a political statement I'm about to make. It's just a statement that's an observation of a theme that I kept hearing from my patients. Now, this comes from the younger generation of veterans, but ask yourself, could you substitute the words Vietnam conflict, Vietnam War, for Iraq? So this statement comes from a movie, actually. I didn't want to bring in a particular patient's story, so I'm pulling this from the movie Almost Sunrise, but I heard this, or something very similar, from a lot of my patients. What we thought we were fighting for, to bring democracy to Iraq, that changed to winning hearts and minds, and it just kept changing and getting tweaked and tweaked and tweaked. And at one point you thought, what are we doing? What's the purpose? You also both fought a vanishing enemy. What I mean by enemy is that a vanishing enemy is that it was hard to tell friend from foe, particularly hard. Starting with the Vietnam War, that was a different kind of war. It was a transition in the way that American wars were fought. The enemy infiltrated at such a level that you could not tell friend from foe, and you did not know who was safe and who could be trusted. And similarly today in the urban combat zones where they fight, it's not clear who the combatants are. The enemy can vanish into the walls in the same way, which is a form of terror. It's a form of psychological terror to not know who your enemy is, who you're gunning for. One of the differences is that Vietnam veterans often never had a safe place to withdraw. So at the end of the day, there was never a ceasefire or way to get behind the wire. There's no outside the wire, behind the wire dimension for many of you. Now today's veterans, they typically have more infrastructure, more bases. And they also have sometimes multiple deployments. So I'm not trying to say one is easier than the other. I'm trying to say they're both very hard, very, very hard in a way that I hope we can see a commonality in the kinds of trauma perhaps you've both experienced. So how do today's veterans actually feel about you? They're a stoic bunch. They probably won't say it, so I'm going to tell you. They love and admire you more than they will ever tell you. They look to you as the warriors who walked point in a different kind of war, who had the persistence and the courage to live in a living hell situation month after month and endure it to serve our country. In fact, I'll say that the amount of admiration in their hearts, if there was any way to let you feel that and let it really penetrate your heart, it might actually heal some of the damage that's been done in terms of how you've been treated, because they really love and admire all of you. So despite all these challenges, I'm hopeful. The reason I'm hopeful is because of what I see in a room like this. The way that you have that deep bond and camaraderie and that laughter, and the way that you can take your memories and your situations and just create a common tribe here in the room. The power of that tribe has a power that is greater than the voice of despair. I've been at the end of the tunnel with many veterans, whether Vietnam era or today's veterans, and I can tell you the power of the tribe is greater than the power of despair if you deploy it. It was this group that first supported myself and a Marine Corps veteran named Brian Vargas. We developed a project called the Warrior Box Project, and I have to tell you a very brief story, and I wish you could hear it directly from him, but I'll try to do it justice. Brian was one of my first patients at the VA in 2009. He had been wounded and had around 200 medical procedures when he came back from his time in service. He was in the polytrauma unit in Palo Alto, and then he was assigned to work with me. And it took us a long time to build trust. That trust was hard-earned, and understandably. But we built that trust, and there was a time when he was really in trouble, and we both knew it. We had a trust, and we had a bond, and we both knew it. And he didn't want to be at risk, because he loved his wife, but he was at risk. And so what we agreed was that we would create this box, and he would put everything that he told me he stays in the fight for on top of the key to his gun lock, his firearm lock, I should say. I knew it was going to be the wrong move to suggest that I have him remove his firearm in this case. That's a very, very loaded conversation, and one that has to be entered very respectfully. So the right call for us was to negotiate him putting that below everything he told me he would stay in the fight for. And there was a day when he wanted to end his life. And he threw the contents of the box out, and his wife's wedding vows and some shrapnel that had been in his face stopped him. And he came back to me and he said, "Doc, I want to have you assign me to a different provider." And I was confused for a minute. And he said, "I want to be your partner and help you save the lives of my brothers. Because I know that you've got something here that if we teamed up, we could find a way to do this in a way that could keep other people in the fight." So we did that. We decided that the greater good was to partner up and figure out how to adapt this idea to veteran culture, values, and language. We had a lot of late nights figuring that out, and it became a 30 cal ammo can. And so here it is, and it's an ammo can that holds tangible reminders of what a veteran stays in the fight for. Because that's another commonality, is that you all have kind of a shared ethos in terms of something greater than yourselves and serving something that's bigger than yourselves. And you don't maybe have a very strong self-protective instinct, but I know that you'll walk through fire for the people you love. You have a very strong instinct to protect those you love. your brothers, your home front tribe, your family. That instinct is very strong. So here's an example of a warrior box, and it's got some things in there that Brian put in there, including pictures of his beautiful wife, Monica, his wife's wedding vows, which was life-saving to him, the rounds that nearly killed him, a crucifix, and his Purple Heart. And here we are. Brian is there in the middle in the nice suit. I'm a little more casual. We had 96 .30 cal ammo cans donated by a father who lost his son in Iraq. Kevin Graves donated in honor of his son, Joey Graves. The ammo cans were shipped across the country, no charge. And again, it was Vietnam veterans that stepped up. This is Mike there from Vietnam Helicopters. Mike and Chris helped us store those ammo cans for months and months, free of charge, until we were ready to deploy them. And we did deploy them. And we will continue to find opportunities to bring this tool to people at the right time in the right ways. So back in February, this was a reunion that my team at TAPS hosted. And there's this Marine unit, the 2-7 Marines, that have had a suicide rate 4 times greater than any other unit in the Marine Corps. And people told us that they would close ranks, that they don't trust outsiders, that they wouldn't work with anybody outside of their unit. But we didn't find that to be true. My team built trust with them, and we took 23 of them into the woods. Brian came with me as an extension of my team that weekend. And we took them through a lot of grief. We really helped them address some of the massive load of grief that they were carrying. They were called the Forgotten Battalion, but they did a beautiful, heroic job addressing what needed to be addressed to let some of those burdens go. And Brian and I were there with them, and we provided warrior boxes to each of them as part of that weekend. You know, it's funny because I told a couple of my civilian friends that I was going to do this weekend with these Marines, and they said, I think that's a little bit dangerous, don't you think? You 3 women in the woods with 23 Marines, and I just, it was an example of the disconnect. I said, boy, you don't get it. That is about the safest place we could be with those 23 Marines. That's about the safest place that we could find ourselves. It was such an amazing weekend of healing and hope. And every single one of those Marines said that weekend was a 5 out of 5 for impact. And several wrote letters to me spontaneously after the weekend saying, I'm so grateful I had given up on everything else, but this was the most impactful thing I have done. So what is the weight of the pain? The weight of the pain is the weight of the pain of thousands of precious and irreplaceable warriors. Those that we've lost already, and those that we could lose, who are fighting their demons alone. And only their fellow warriors and those they have adopted into the tribe really understand the weight of this pain. What is it going to take for us to shoulder this pain and prevent this loss of people whose time has not yet come? It takes the stamina of a group of people who lived in conditions of unceasing hell month after month, and those who have deployed again and again to today's combat zones. It takes the innovative mindset of today's generation, and the wisdom who have long fought their demons and know how to do this battle. And it takes the courage of all of these warriors and service members unified in a common purpose to not let any of their brothers or sisters be taken before their time. So this is the vision I have for the future. I think the way to get traction in this battle is for the tribe to become one tribe of extended warriors that will lock their shields together against the voice of despair and fight together. This can be a shared battle. But unless we see it as such, I'm concerned that if we're divided, we're not going to get the traction we need to get. The Vietnam veterans of Diablo Valley were the first to support the Warrior Box project. And the veterans of Vietnam helicopters were also the first to stand up and say, I will help. Time and time again, it's the service members who stand up in support of what we're doing. And I'm grateful for that support because I feel like it's such an honor to be on this mission, and it's something that is very important to me and to Brian. So we're going to keep looking for places to deploy this intervention. As I said, I have a more than full-time job that I love very much at TAPS, and Brian is right now getting a master's degree in social work at Berkeley. So he and I are both busy, but we keep our bond of trust strong even when life pulls us in different directions, and we look for ways to keep things moving forward. And I'm sure that you may have some ideas about that or thoughts or ways to support. And so you can find us online or come talk to me afterwards if you want to talk about anything that we're developing. We were told that later this month, actually, at the end of May, if you listen to NPR, there's a program called Snap Judgment. And we were told that our story, mostly a lot of Brian's story, will be featured on Snap Judgment at the end of the month. So we'll see. We'll see if that happens. If it does, we'll post something on the website so that people can access it there, because he really does have a story to share about why he's in the fight and why he asked me to partner with him in this, and how we're unified in our purpose. Thank you for letting me come and talk with you.
Could you say the website?
Oh, yeah, I just don't want to sort of sell anything ever. It's warriorcode.org. And you can come talk to me if you want. I'd be happy to share some further information if you're interested, but no pressure. And thank you so much for all of the support. This is a message of gratitude, not an ask. I wanted to come here to do something for you from my heart. Thank you.
Don't go away, we have something for you. All right, hey, let me read this out. The Vietnam veterans of Diablo Valley give special recognition and appreciation to Dr. Shauna Springer. We thank you for your presentation on Dragon's Tail regarding the long-lasting psychological impacts of the Vietnam War. Your extensive work in assisting hundreds of veterans to reconnect with their tribe, strengthen their relationships, and build lives. Driven by their deepest values, are greatly appreciated. Honored guest speaker, Crow Canyon Country Club, Danville, California.
Thank you, John.
We have one more.
Oh,
The Vietnam veterans of Diablo Valley thank our guest speaker, Dr. Shauna Springer.
thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Let me try and
Nice.
that was moving. Thank you for a wonderful evening. Have a good night. Come on up and talk to the doc. Oh, I'm sorry. I got so wrapped up in that speech. Would you please stand? Let's look at our POW table. Jeff and Mary, would you extinguish the flame, please? Let us not forget our brothers and sisters who are not with us.